Stay with this story until the very end, because what Garrett Winslow found inside that rusted Packard was about to cost him everything he thought he knew about people, and give Owen Fairchild something he had stopped believing he deserved. Owen Fairchild walked into that auction yard on a Tuesday morning in October with $400 in an envelope and his daughter sitting on his shoulders because the mud in the lot was ankle-deep and her boots were new. He had driven 2 hours from Timmins in a truck that needed a new alternator, which he had replaced himself the night before at the kitchen table. While Maya slept, the parts spread across old newspaper, the bookmarked with a crayon she had left there. He was 41 years old. He had grease under his fingernails that soap had long since stopped reaching. He wore a canvas jacket with a crack in the left cuff seam that he kept meaning to fix and never did. He was not looking for anything in particular. He had heard about the estate sale from a guy at the shop. Someone had died out near Gogama, an old man who had collected things his whole life and had no family to leave them to, and the province had contracted the auction to clear the property. Owen had come because he needed a reliable vehicle for under $500. And because Maya had been asking to see where the countryside went when the highway ran out, and he had not been able to give her a good answer. Garrett Winslow was standing near the registration table when Owen arrived. He was the kind of man who wore a quilted vest over a dress shirt at an outdoor auction in October, which told you something about him even before he opened his mouth. He ran Winslow Estate Acquisitions out of a restored Victorian on King Street in Sudbury, and he had driven up that morning in a black Range Rover with a trailer hitch for the things he intended to take back. He had 3 employees waiting at the perimeter of the lot. He had a clipboard. He had coffee in a paper cup with a lid, and he held it in a way that suggested the cup and the clipboard and the vest were all part of the same performance. Owen signed in, lifted Maya down from his shoulders, and took her hand. The lot was maybe 2 acres, covered in the residue of a man's entire life. Furniture under tarps, boxes of dishes, hand tools racked along a chain-link fence, a garden tractor that would not start for less than $200 in parts. And at the far edge of the lot, half hidden behind a collapsed equipment shed, sat a car. Owen almost didn't see it. He almost walked the other direction, toward the tool racks, because he needed a 3/4-inch ratchet and his own was stripped. But Maya pointed. She said, "That one looks sad." It did look sad. It was covered in a tarpaulin that had itself rotted through in 3 places, and what showed underneath was the color of old clay, a brownish green that was not a color the car had started life as, but had become over the years of sitting in the open air of northern Ontario. The chrome was blackened. Both rear tires were flat. The windshield had a crack that ran the full width of the glass at an angle, like a river on a map. Owen lifted the edge of the tarp and looked. He stood there for a moment without saying anything. It was a Packard, a 1937 Packard Super 8, or what had once been one. The body lines were unmistakable once you knew what you were looking at, and Owen knew because his father had kept a photograph of one on the wall of his garage in Kapuskasing for 30 years, and Owen had grown up asking questions about it. The long hood, the way the fenders curved into the running boards, the shape of the grille surround. These things are not forgotten once they are learned. Owen reached through the gap where the passenger window had been left open and unlatched the door. The interior smelled like decades of closed air and something organic and sweet that he could not immediately name. The seat leather had dried and cracked but had not rotted. The dashboard instruments were intact, the glass clouded but unbroken. On the passenger floor, wedged under the seat, there was a flat tin box. He should not have opened it. The auction had not started yet, but Maya had climbed in through the open door and was sitting in the front seat with her hands on the steering wheel, saying "Brum" very quietly to herself, and Owen crouched down and pulled the tin box out and opened the latch. Inside there were papers, old documents, some of them. A service record written in pencil on pages that had gone soft with age. 2 photographs, a folded letter with a crest at the top that he could not make out clearly in the shadow of the tarp. He did not read the letter. He looked at the photographs for maybe 4 seconds. Then he folded the tin box closed and stood up. He had already been approached once that morning, not by Garrett Winslow but by one of Winslow's employees, a young woman with a lanyard who had told him the tools along the fence were reserved for preview by invited buyers. Owen had not known about the invitation system, and the woman had not explained it warmly. He had the general impression that people like Garrett Winslow preferred that people like Owen Fairchild look without touching and leave early. The auction opened at 10. The Packard came up as Lot 47. The auctioneer described it as a 1937 Packard, condition unknown, non-running, sold as is with no representations as to mechanical state or historical provenance. Estimated value, he said, with the particular neutrality of a man who has estimated the value of a great many things in his life, was somewhere between $800 and $1,200 for parts and scrap. Garrett Winslow bid $900. Owen bid $950. Winslow bid $1,000 without looking at him. Owen bid $1,100. Winslow turned then, for the first time, and looked at Owen the way you look at something that has gotten into a place where it doesn't belong. His eyes moved from Owen's jacket to Owen's boots to Maya sitting on Owen's left arm. And then he made a small sound through his nose and bid $1,200. Owen bid $1,300. He had $400 in the envelope and $800 in his account, and a repair bill at the parts supplier that he had been paying down at $200 a month. And $1,300 was a number that was going to require a conversation with his bank that he was not looking forward to. But he had looked at those photographs in the tin box, and something in him had gone very quiet and very certain, the way certainty sometimes feels, not like excitement, but like weight. Winslow bid $1,400. Owen bid $1,500 and stopped breathing. Garrett Winslow looked at him again. Then he looked at the car. Then he said something to the woman with the lanyard, who was standing beside him, and she wrote something on the clipboard. Winslow shook his head once and turned away. The auctioneer called it 3 times, and Owen Fairchild bought a 1937 Packard Super 8 in unknown condition for $1,500 he did not entirely have. After the gavel came down, Winslow passed him on the way out of the lot. He did not stop, he said, over his shoulder, without breaking stride. "You just bought yourself a very expensive boat anchor." He said it pleasantly in the tone of a man sharing genuinely useful information. Then he got into his Range Rover and drove away. Maya looked up at Owen. "What's a boat anchor?" she said. "Something heavy," Owen said. "Come on, let's find a tow truck." He did not tell anyone what was in the tin box. He had the Packard towed to his rented garage bay on the edge of Timmins, the one he shared with a man named Chet, who fixed snowmobiles in winter and charged Owen $200 a month for the other half. He put the tin box on the workbench under the lamp, and he read the letter. The letter was dated June 1953 and was written on the letterhead of the Packard Motor Car Company's Regional Service Coordinator in Toronto. It confirmed the completion of a full factory service on vehicle serial number 1372984, chassis number matching, and noted that the vehicle had been returned to its owner following his request for records authentication. The owner's name, typed beneath the signature, was Harold Maitland Forsyth. Owen looked up the name. He had a laptop on the workbench, old, with a cracked corner on the bezel, and he typed the name into the search bar at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, while Maya slept in the back seat of his truck under 2 blankets because the garage did not have a second room. What came back was not immediate. He had to go 3 pages deep into the results and follow a link to an archived newspaper column from a Toronto paper dated 1961, a profile of a man who had made a particular kind of fortune in Canadian railway contracts in the 1940s and had spent part of that fortune on automobiles. Among the automobiles mentioned in the article, in passing, in a subordinate clause, almost as an afterthought, was a 1937 Packard Super 8, custom-bodied, one of 6 produced with a specific coachwork commission from a Toronto firm that had itself closed in 1942. The article noted that Forsyth had purchased the car new, had used it until the mid-1950s, and had then, in the writer's phrase, retired it to his property in the north. Owen sat back in his chair and looked at the car. He spent the next 11 days working. He worked in the mornings before he dropped Maya at school, and he worked in the evenings after he picked her up. And on the 2 days when his friend Deborah took Maya for the afternoon, he worked without stopping except to eat a sandwich standing up. He was not trying to restore the car. He understood that restoration was not his job here. His job was to understand what he had, and to document it, and to do nothing that would compromise the car's original condition. He pulled the engine. He recorded everything with his phone camera, every serial number, every stamping, every original fastener. He found beneath 40 years of oil and road residue a chassis plate that confirmed the production sequence. He found, behind the rear seat cushion, a small embroidered tag from the coachwork firm, intact, the thread still legible. He found, in the engine compartment, a repair invoice from 1947 stapled to the firewall with staples that had rusted but held. He called his cousin Bernard, who knew a man in Hamilton who dealt in pre-war vehicles. Bernard called the man in Hamilton, whose name was Terence, and Terence drove up on the 9th day. He stood in the garage for a long time without saying anything. He walked around the car 3 times. He read the documents that Owen had laid out on the workbench in clear plastic sleeves. He said, eventually, that he would need to make some calls. Terence made the calls. The calls went to a collector network that Owen had not known existed, that operated mostly through private channels and word of mouth, and that had, it turned out, been looking for this specific car for 11 years. The Coachwork Commission. 6 cars built, 2 confirmed destroyed, 2 unaccounted for, 1 known to be in a private collection in London, was considered by a particular subset of pre-war Packard enthusiasts to be among the most significant surviving examples of Canadian custom coachwork from the late 1930s. There were people, Terence explained carefully, who had spent a considerable amount of money and effort trying to find the missing cars. On the 14th day after the auction, Owen received an offer. He was at the garage when it came, and Maya was there too, sitting on an overturned bucket eating an apple and drawing in a notebook she kept for this purpose. Drawing the car in pieces as Owen had laid them out, in her particular style that was not accurate but was attentive in a way that accuracy sometimes isn't. Owen's phone rang, and it was Terence, and Terence told him the number, and Owen said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Say that again." Terence said it again. The number was $3,400,000. It was a private sale, no auction, no intermediary beyond Terence's finder's fee and the legal costs. The buyer was a foundation in Vancouver that acquired and preserved significant Canadian industrial and transportation artifacts. They wanted the documentation as well as the car, and they had confirmed through their own sources that the provenance was solid. Owen sat down on the concrete floor of the garage, next to the bucket Maya was sitting on. Maya looked at him. She said, "What happened?" He put his arm around her and didn't answer for a minute. Then he said, "You remember that car you said looked sad?" She looked at the Packard. It still looked like a Packard that had spent 40 years next to a collapsed shed in northern Ontario. It was not going to win a concourse. It was never going to look like the photograph on his father's garage wall. But it was real, and it was whole, and it was apparently worth a very specific and enormous amount of money to the right people. "It looks less sad now," Maya said. He put his hand on her head. "Yeah," he said, "it does." What happened after that took several weeks to finalize, and Owen handled it carefully, and without drama, the way he handled most things. He retained a lawyer in Timmins who had done his late wife's estate, and who Owen trusted because the man had once told him something was going to cost more than he'd hoped and explained exactly why, which is a rare quality. The sale was completed. The foundation sent 2 people in a transport vehicle to collect the car and the documentation, and they were professional and courteous, and they wore gloves. And when they drove away, Owen stood in the empty garage bay and looked at the clean concrete where the Packard had been. He paid off the parts supplier. He paid off the credit card he had carried a balance on since the winter before Maya was born. He put a specific amount aside for Maya's schooling. He kept the garage bay but paid a full year ahead. He bought a used truck with a working heater and replaced the cracked window in the kitchen of the house he rented, which had been covered with plastic sheeting since February. And then, quietly, without announcement, he called Terrence. He said he wanted to keep doing this. He had spent 11 days documenting a pre-war vehicle and talking to Terrence's network, and he had understood something about himself in that time, that the gap between what something was and what people believed it to be was often very wide, and that he had a particular ability to see into that gap and measure it accurately. He said he did not know if that was a business, but he was willing to find out. Terrence said that in his experience it was in fact a business. He said he had been looking for someone like Owen for a while. He said the finder's fee on the next job was negotiable upward if Owen was interested in being the person who did the finding. Owen said he was. He did not call Garrett Winslow. He did not send him a photograph of the check or a letter about the final sale price or a message of any kind. Owen was not a man who collected debts of that nature. But he did, some months later, hear through someone at the shop that Winslow Estate Acquisitions had put in a bid on a different estate lot that spring, one that had included a vehicle described in the listing as a non-running farm truck, and that Winslow had passed on it because the reserve was too high. Owen heard, from the same source, that someone else had picked up the truck, and that the truck had turned out to be something the seller had not known it was, and that the sale had gone well for the buyer. He heard this, and he noted it, and he moved on, because there was work to do. There was always work to do, and he had learned, slowly, over years of doing things alone in garages while the people with clipboards and quilted vests stood in the warm part of the room, that the work was what stayed. The rest of it was just noise. Maya asked him, one night that winter, what he thought about when he was working. He thought about it. He said, I think about what something really is, underneath what it looks like. She considered this with the seriousness she applied to most questions. Then she said, like the sad car. Like the sad car, he said. She went back to her drawing. Outside, the snow came down over Timmins the way it always did in January. Steadily, without fanfare, covering everything in a clean layer that made the world briefly look like it was starting over. Owen watched it through the kitchen window for a moment, the one that no longer had plastic sheeting over it, and then he turned back to the table and the work that was waiting.